I can't take it anymore. Please say something to him too. I had reached the limit of my patience. What's gotten into you all of a sudden? It's not all of a sudden. I've been asking you many times, haven't I? Tell him clearly. I pleaded with my husband to get his younger brother to move out of our house. You want me to kick out my brother, who has nowhere else to go? You're my wife, and for him, you're his sister-in-law. How can you say something like that? That's right. You're really heartless. Not only my husband, but even my mother-in-law concerned me as if I were the one at fault. This is a story about the unbelievable family I got involved in. My name is Mia. I got married to my current husband, Liam, when I was 28 years old. We met through a matchmaking arrangement. During my school days, I was fully dedicated to karate, which I had been practicing since childhood, and romance took a backseat. I spent my days consumed by club activities, striving to balance it with my studies. Of course, that doesn't mean I had no desire to get married once I became a working adult. However, as someone who had never seriously pursued a romantic relationship before, I didn't quite understand how to build connections with men. Even after becoming a working adult, I couldn't find a boyfriend. Seeing me in that situation, my company's boss said, I know someone who might be a good match for you, and introduced me to my current husband. My first impression of him was that he was an incredibly kind person. He was a military man and gave off a peaceful, gentle vibe that excluded pacifism. Since he took a liking to me and I had always wanted to get married by the time I turned 30, I quickly accepted his invitation to start dating. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and we soon fell deeply in love with each other. I particularly liked his sincere and gentle nature, and I thought that I could build a life together with him. After a while, he proposed me, and I immediately accepted. We were happily married without any issues. When Liam and I decided to get married, my wealthy parents, who owned several houses as vacation homes, gave me one of those houses as a gift. You can choose any house you like. I chose a house that was just the right size, not too big or not too small. It was an ordinary house, slightly larger than the average single-family home. It had enough rooms in case we had children in the future, and it also had a backyard. The location was convenient, with good transportation access and proximity to the train station, and there were no inconveniences like supermarkets nearby, so I chose that place. Even Liam, who usually didn't show his emotions openly, said something at that moment. Wow, this is amazing. Are you sure it's okay for us to receive such a splendid house? I remember him murmuring with a hint of apology. Our happy life is about to begin. I believed in that without a doubt. After a wedding ceremony went smoothly, everything was going well for us. However, a few months later, my father-in-law, who had a pre-existing illness, passed away. My husband had one younger brother, but he worked and lived in a factory in another prefecture, so we rarely had the chance to meet. I met him for the first time at the wedding ceremony. The second time we met was at my father-in-law's funeral. After my father-in-law's passing, my mother-in-law was left alone at her parents' house, and my husband started contacting her frequently. Simultaneously, my mother-in-law started visiting our house frequently. Certainly, my husband had the responsibility of being the eldest son, and he may have felt a sense of obligation. I understood the concern from my mother-in-law, who was now alone, but at the time I was busy with work, and our home was the only place where I could find solace. So I was a little worried about my mother-in-law constantly being present in our home as if it were a given. After a few months of such daily life, one day my husband informed me, "Hey Mia, I'm thinking of living together with my mom." Huh? I was puzzled by my husband's sudden statement. Why all of a sudden? She's already coming to our house so frequently. When I said that, "It must be hard for her to come all the way here every time, right? So I think it would be better if we lived together," he said, with sparkling eyes as if he had come up with a brilliant idea. Wait a minute. It's troubling to be suddenly told something like this. We have our own lives too, you know? As I expressed my concerns, "It's not like this house is too big for just the two of us. We have extra rooms. I think it will be helpful for my mom to live with us." He didn't seem willing to consider my opinion. After that, I didn't react much, but my husband kept pushing the idea, and if anything happened, "I'm worried about leaving my mom alone," he said. Honestly, I wasn't very enthusiastic about it since our married life had just begun, but if it was said that my mother-in-law was worried, I couldn't strongly argue back. While I was indecisive with a clear answer, my mother-in-law sold her parents' house, and it was forced into a situation where I had to accept my mother-in-law. At first, I blamed my husband for proceeding without consulting me. But the family house is gone now. Mom has nowhere else to go. It can't be helped, he said. And somehow I lost the will to argue back. Life after that was tough for me personally. I didn't experience any outright harassment like what is called yomeiri bullying in society, but I disliked being constantly told by, "You are the daughter-in-law, you know?" Having that kind of old-fashioned thinking, she would say, "Since you married my son and became part of the family, you should serve your husband's family." Whenever I prioritized something current, she would repeatedly tell me, "You are the daughter-in-law, so please have a little more awareness." But personally, ever since my mother-in-law started coming to our house, staying at home became a burden, and I started working overtime more often. While skillfully dogging my mother-in-law's sarcastic remarks every day, we were still leading a relatively ordinary life. That is, until that instant happened. After a while, my brother-in-law, who had been living and working at the factory, said that he would quit his job at the end of the fiscal year and return to his parents' house. My husband, my mother-in-law, and I were all surprised by this sudden announcement, but there was something more important that we had to consider. It was where he would come back to. Our old family home had already been sold, and it was no longer in a livable state as we pleased. When my brother-in-law, who had been determined to return to his parents' house, found out that my husband and my mother-in-law had sold the house without consulting him, he blamed them. "I never heard anything about selling the family home. Who made that decision without consulting me?" My brother-in-law had a flashy appearance and a rough way of speaking. Since I had never interacted with people like him before, I honestly found it difficult and preferred to avoid getting involved as much as possible. "I'm sorry, but I was worried about Mom living alone in that house, and I thought you were going to continue living and working over there." Even though my husband tried to pacify him. "Huh? I don't know anything about that. You made that decision without asking anyone. Take responsibility, you damn older brother." Saying that, he shouted at my husband, Although my husband was supposed to be the older brother, he was just trembling in response to my brother-in-law's words. My husband couldn't say anything back to his younger brother and simply turned pale, looked down. In the first place, regarding the family home, my late father-in-law had said, "If something happens to me, entrust everything about the house to your wife." Thus my brother-in-law, who left the family home on his own, worked in another state, and didn't even send money home, have the right to blame my mother-in-law and the others? I had such thoughts, but in the end, we couldn't reach a resolution, and it was decided that he would live with us until he found his next job. I was really against it, so I said to my husband, "I don't want to live with your brother. Your mother and I have shouldered the living expenses now that we live together." But my husband replied, "As soon as he finds a job, we'll make him leave. Please bear with it until then." I couldn't reject it on my own and kick him out, so reluctantly, my brother-in-law ended up living with us. At this point, my mental state was already greatly affected, but the real difficulties came later. First of all, even though it was a condition that my brother-in-law would find a job, even after a month, he hadn't made any effort to search for one. He didn't look at job listings, didn't go for interviews, and just spent his days hiding in the living room. There were days when he stayed locked in his room, playing music at high volume, and days when he occupied the living room TV for hours on his own. I was accumulating stress day by day. To make matters worse, as soon as I came home from work, "Isn't it ready?" He treated me like a housekeeper, and it was unbearable. I couldn't bear it any longer and complained to my husband. "Hey, it's about your brother. Can't something be done about the way he treats me like a housekeeper?" "Like a housekeeper? He looks up to you and treats you like an older sister, Mia," my husband said with a laugh. "Treats me like an older sister? Where? He's always bossing me around. This is now how a housekeeper should be treated. I'm not a servant in this house." As I became emotional, my husband said, "It's fine, isn't it? Mia is my wife after all." Saying that, my anger reached its peak, and I couldn't help but shout, "I'm your wife, but I'm not your brother's wife," he finally said to me, which made me lose my temper even more. "Come on, enough already. Sure, Mia is not his wife, but my brother is still your brother-in-law. Don't cause unnecessary conflicts and let's get along." In the end, that's what he said. Honestly, I was disappointed with my husband's statement. In this household, it seems like everything will be fine if I just endure. That's what my husband seems to believe. I thought that there was no point in saying anything more to my husband, so I stopped complaining about my brother-in-law and mother-in-law to him. Instead, from time to time, I would call my parents and vent my frustrations. My parents would always say, "If something happens, you can come back home anytime." So I managed to endure living in this house. However, one day, my brother-in-law caused trouble again. When I finished work and came home, there was a fire truck parked in front of the house. Curious about what had happened, I saw several firefighters coming out of the front door while my husband and mother-in-law thanked them. After watching the fire truck leave, I confronted my husband. "What's going on? Why did a fire truck come to our house?" Saying that, my husband and mother-in-law exchanged glances and hesitantly explained to me, "Well, it's because our brother accidentally caused a fire with a cigarette butt." "What?" Surprised and furious, I raised my voice. As I listened to the details, it turned out that a minor fire had started from a cigarette butt, and my panicked mother-in-law had contacted my husband and the fire department. Why didn't they inform me? It was just a coincidence that I encountered the firefighters when I arrived home, but were they planning to keep it a secret if I had come back without knowing? When I asked them that, both of them fell silent. Frustrated with their silence, I hurriedly went to my brother-in-law's room and entered without knocking. "Hey, what the hell? Knock before entering." Ignoring my brother-in-law, who was angry with me, I looked around the room. Immediately, I noticed scorch marks on the floor and right next to the laid-out futon. Ever since my brother-in-law came, the house had been smelling like smoke, and even that was stressful for me. And now, to top it all off, there were scorch marks on my beloved house. I had reached my limit. Even though my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were right in front of me, "I can't take it anymore. Please say something to him too," I pleaded with my husband. My husband, flustered, said, "What's with the sudden outburst?" "It's not sudden. Haven't I been asking you many times until now? Tell him clearly too, that he needs to leave." I appealed my husband, asking him to have my brother-in-law move out. In response, my husband let out a deep sigh and reluctantly said, "You want me to kick out my brother, who has nowhere else to go? You're my wife, and for him, you're his sister-in-law. How can you even say something like that?" And he started talking. "That's right. You're truly despicable as a person." Saying that, not just my husband, but even my mother-in-law approached me, as if I were the one at fault. Why am I the one being blamed? This is a precious house that my father passed down to me in the first place. Not to mention my husband, but my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, who started living here without any prearrangement, have no right to complain. Feeling that, I couldn't back down this time. "Just leave," I clearly told my brother-in-law. You want to kick out your own brother-in-law? If you can't stand it, then you leave." Saying that, he stormed out of the room. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law was grinning, watching the situation unfold. Feeling frustrated, I returned to my room. The next day, when I came home from work, the key wouldn't fit in the front door lock. No matter how many times I tried, it wouldn't go in, and there was no response when I pressed the intercom. Then, I received a notification on my phone, a message from my husband. "I've had the locks changed. Once you've cooled down, I'll let you back in the house." That's what it said. Don't mess with me. If you're serious about that, then I'll leave too. Thinking that way, when I went back to my parents' house and explained the situation to them. After hearing me out, my parents' faces gradually grew stern, and my father said, "Leave it to me, Mia." Saying that, he asked a lawyer he knew for help. Things progressed rapidly. A divorce petition was filed, and a formal notice demanding eviction from the house was sent. On a later date, a meeting was arranged at that house with the presence of the lawyer. As soon as the discussion began, my husband said, "Divorce over something like this is ridiculous." He refused to get a divorce, but when I said I wouldn't agree to a divorce and didn't mind going to court, he quickly gave up. Perhaps overwhelmed by the word court, my husband suddenly became quiet. However, when the topic of leaving the house came up, he raised his voice and resisted again. "This house is our home as a married couple. Even as a husband, I have the right to own it." With an air of superiority, he looked down on me. Then the lawyer took out a certificate of registered matters and said this: "You have no rights to this house whatsoever." That's right. This house was a gift from my father before marriage, given to me as an inheritance. For my husband, it couldn't be considered marital property. I could see the faces of my husband and the other two men turning paler and paler. Perhaps they had thought that they wouldn't actually be forced to leave. Gradually, their heads began to hang low. Mia, can we reconsider the divorce?" My husband suddenly brought up such a convenient suggestion. "What will you do?" the lawyer asked. And in response, "Of course, I'll proceed with the divorce. My feelings haven't changed," I said it clearly. As a result, the three husbands hung their heads, and perhaps realizing there was no other choice, my husband agreed to the divorce without resistance. The divorce was finalized without any issues. The ex-husbands moved out of the house. It seems the three of them moved to a rundown apartment. Of course, they couldn't enjoy the freedom they desired, and both my mother-in-law and younger brother-in-law accumulated stress. Regarding my brother-in-law, it appears he tried to vent his frustration outside and ended up causing an assault incident. Well, it's no longer my concern. I successfully regained the house and repaired the room my brother-in-law used to live in. The burn marks on the floor that bothered me disappeared, and my mood brightened. Now my parents come to stay over on weekends, and I'm enjoying reasonably pleasant days. I went out for a meal with the lawyer who helped me with this matter as the way to express my gratitude, and we continue to meet regularly. Perhaps one day I'll have the chance to have a married life again. With such thoughts in mind, I'm living happily every day.